You may want to lock the doors first." The words drifted across the courtroom so softly that at first, nobody reacted. Then the silence hit. Heavy, sudden, the kind that made even the reporters lower their cameras for half a second. Naomi Brooks stood beside the defense table with silver handcuffs circling her wrists, her dark gray blazer wrinkled from 2 nights in county holding. Rain tapped steadily against the courthouse windows 30 floors above downtown Chicago, while fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Officer Daniel Mercer leaned back in the witness chair with the relaxed confidence of a man who thought the ending had already been written. Beside him, Officer Travis Cole smirked and folded his arms across his Navy uniform, the polished badge on his chest catching the cold white light. Naomi looked small compared to them. Quiet. Composed. Another black woman the system had already decided not to believe. "Ms. Brooks," Judge Eleanor Hayes said carefully from the bench, adjusting her glasses, "this court is prepared to issue sentencing unless you have new evidence to present." Naomi slowly lifted her eyes. Calm brown eyes that never once drifted toward the jury. Never toward the cameras. Only toward Mercer. "I do," she said. Mercer chuckled under his breath. The sound carried farther than he intended inside the dead-still courtroom. A few people in the gallery laughed quietly with him. The prosecutor flipped through his files with visible impatience. Everyone here thought they knew who Naomi Brooks was. A 34-year-old black woman arrested on Interstate 57 with 2 pounds of narcotics hidden beneath the trunk liner of her car. Body cam footage showed officers recovering the packages. Signed evidence reports confirmed chain of custody. Prosecutors called it an open-and-shut trafficking case. The local news stations had already run her mugshot for 2 straight days beneath giant red banners reading drug corridor arrest. Outside the courthouse, protesters stood behind metal barricades shouting at each other through the rain. Some called her a criminal. Others called her another victim. But inside courtroom 8B, none of that noise existed. Anymore. Only the ticking wall clock. Only the hum of the air vents. Only Naomi standing perfectly still while Mercer watched her like a hunter watching trapped prey. "Your Honor," the prosecutor interrupted, irritation sharpening his voice. "The defendant has delayed these proceedings long enough." Naomi reached slowly toward the defense table. Instantly, 2 deputies stiffened beside the courtroom doors. Mercer's grin widened slightly. He thought she was nervous. Thought she was finally breaking under pressure. But Naomi simply placed a thin manila folder onto the table with steady hands. No trembling. No panic. Just patience. "Before this court continues," she said quietly, "I need everyone to understand something." The rain outside grew louder, streaking the giant courthouse windows in silver lines. Somewhere down the hallway, elevator doors opened with a soft ding. Naomi looked directly at Mercer again. This time, the smile on his face faded just a little. "Officer Mercer testified that the narcotics recovered from my vehicle were logged at 9:42 p.m., she said. "That would be difficult." The prosecutor frowned. Judge Hayes leaned forward slightly. Travis shifted in his chair. Naomi opened the folder. Inside rested a black leather badge wallet stamped with 3 silver letters that instantly drained the color from Mercer's face. DEA. The courtroom did not erupt all at once. It happened in pieces. First came the silence. Then the sharp scrape of Officer Travis Cole pushing himself upright in his chair. Then whispers rolled across the gallery like wind moving through dry leaves. Judge Eleanor Hayes stared at the black leather credential wallet resting on the defense table as though it might disappear if she blinked hard enough. Naomi Brooks did not move. Her calmness suddenly felt heavier than the handcuffs still circling her wrists. Officer Mercer swallowed once and quickly looked toward the prosecutor, silently begging for control to return to the room. But control had already left. Naomi opened the badge slowly. The silver federal seal reflected against the polished wood beneath the courtroom lights. Drug Enforcement Administration. Special Agent. Active. Status. The words seemed to pull the oxygen out of the air itself. Somewhere near the back row, a reporter whispered, "Oh my God," before frantically reaching for his phone. Judge Hayes straightened in her chair. "Ms. Brooks," she said carefully, "explain this court immediately." Naomi finally looked away from Mercer and turned toward the bench. "For the past 11 months," she said, her voice even and controlled, I have been assigned to an ongoing federal investigation involving narcotics trafficking and evidence tampering inside the Chicago Metro Narcotics Task Force. Travis shook his head instantly. No, that is impossible. But Mercer stayed silent. That frightened Naomi more than if he had started yelling. Because guilty men usually got loud when cornered. Mercer only stared at the folder on the table like he already knew what came next. Rainwater slid slowly down the courthouse windows behind him, turning the gray afternoon outside into blurred streaks of silver and charcoal. Naomi continued. On Tuesday night, I was traveling northbound on Interstate 57 while conducting surveillance connected to Operation Harbor Line. The prosecutor interrupted quickly. Your Honor, there has been no federal notification regarding this alleged operation. Naomi nodded once. Correct. Because local notification would have compromised the investigation. The room shifted again. Reporters leaned forward. Jury members exchanged uneasy glances. One woman near the front slowly covered her mouth with both hands. Naomi reached into the folder and removed several photographs sealed inside transparent evidence sleeves. Grainy nighttime images. Storage docks. License plates. Uniformed officers meeting unidentified men beside unmarked vans. Mercer's jaw tightened visibly. These photographs were taken 6 days ago, Naomi said. Officer Daniel Mercer appears in all 6. Travis turned toward Mercer with confusion flooding his face for the first time. Dan. Mercer ignored him completely. Sweat now glistened near his temple despite the cold courtroom air. Naomi placed another document onto the table. At exactly 9:42 p.m., Officer Mercer stated that narcotics were recovered from beneath my trunk liner. She paused. However, according to his own body camera metadata, the recording device had been manually disconnected 4 minutes earlier. The courtroom exploded into overlapping voices before Judge Hayes slammed her gavel sharply. Order. Naomi remained perfectly still through the chaos. She had spent months preparing for this moment. Months pretending to be invisible. Months allowing men like Mercer to underestimate her because of her skin, her silence, and the ordinary sedan she drove through neighborhoods they thought belonged to them. Then the back courtroom doors opened again. Heavy footsteps echoed across marble floors. 6 men and women entered wearing dark windbreakers marked federal agent in bold gold letters across the chest. This time, nobody laughed. The federal agents moved with the kind of quiet authority that instantly changed the temperature of a room. Nobody spoke as they crossed the marble floor toward the defense table. Their dark jackets carried rain droplets across the shoulders, and the gold lettering on their backs flashed beneath the courtroom lights with every step. Officer Travis Cole slowly backed away from the witness stand as though distance alone could protect him from what was happening. But Naomi Brooks never looked at him. Her attention stayed fixed on Daniel Mercer. He had not moved since the agents entered. Not even once. The same man who had laughed beside the highway 2 nights earlier now sat frozen beneath the eyes of an entire courtroom. Federal Agent Raymond Ellis stepped forward from the group, tall and silver-haired, carrying a thick evidence binder under one arm. He placed it carefully onto the prosecution table before turning toward Judge Eleanor Hayes. Your Honor, he said calmly. The Drug Enforcement Administration formally requests immediate suspension of these proceedings pending federal intervention. The prosecutor looked stunned. You cannot simply walk into my courtroom and dismantle an active criminal case. Ellis met his gaze evenly. Counselor, your criminal case was manufactured by the officers sitting in this room. Gasps swept across the gallery again. Camera. Shudders erupted like distant static. Naomi finally exhaled slowly through her nose. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Just exhaustion. 11 months undercover had taught her how to hide fear so completely that even she sometimes forgot it was there. Judge Hayes removed her glasses carefully. Agent Brooks, she said, I need you to explain exactly what happened on Interstate 57. Naomi nodded once. The chains around her wrists gave a soft metallic sound as she folded her hands together in front of her. At approximately 9:37 p.m., Officer Mercer initiated a traffic stop, claiming my left taillight was damaged. Ellis immediately opened the evidence binder and projected a photograph onto the courtroom monitor behind the bench. Naomi's black sedan appeared beneath a gas station canopy less than 20 minutes before the stop. Both taillights glowed bright red against the darkness. Perfectly functional. A low murmur spread through the jury box. Travis looked at Mercer again, this time with visible panic. "Dan," he whispered under his breath, "you said she was clean." Mercer snapped his head toward him instantly. "Shut up." Too late. The microphones near the witness stand picked up every word. Naomi watched the realization hit Travis in real time. The younger officer had spent years following Mercer through narcotics raids, traffic stops, and late-night arrests without ever questioning how easily evidence always seemed to appear. But now his confidence was cracking apart in front of cameras, federal agents, and 12 silent jurors. Ellis flipped to another page inside the binder. At 9:42 p.m., body camera footage resumes after a 4-minute interruption. During that gap, narcotics were allegedly recovered from Agent Brooks's vehicle. Naomi reached calmly toward the folder again and removed a sealed laboratory report. "Those narcotics," she said quietly, "were chemically tagged by the DEA 36 hours earlier as part of a federal tracking operation connected to missing evidence inside Chicago Metro Narcotics." Mercer's face lost what little color remained. Rain continued sliding down the courthouse windows behind him in long silver streaks, while thunder rolled faintly across the city skyline. Judge Hayes leaned forward slowly. "Officer Mercer," she said carefully, "is there any explanation you wish to provide before this court proceeds further?" For the first time since entering the courtroom that morning, Daniel Mercer looked afraid. Daniel Mercer opened his mouth once before any sound came out. The confidence that had carried him through years of traffic stops and courtroom testimonies was gone now, stripped away piece by piece beneath the cold fluorescent lights. Every eye inside courtroom 8B remained fixed on him. The jurors, the reporters, the deputies standing near the rear wall. Even Travis Cole looked at him differently now, no longer like a partner, but like a man realizing the ground beneath him was collapsing. Judge Eleanor Hayes waited in complete silence. Rain continued tapping against the tall courthouse windows, while thunder rolled somewhere far above Lake Michigan. Mercer finally cleared his throat. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, though even he sounded unconvinced. "Those drugs were recovered legally." Naomi Brooks did not react. She simply watched him the same way she had watched him on the side of Interstate 57 2 nights earlier, while red and blue lights flashed across wet asphalt and passing 18-wheelers sprayed mist into the dark October air. Back then Mercer had smiled when he searched her trunk. Smiled when Travis found the narcotics package beneath the liner exactly where it had been planted minutes earlier during the unexplained body camera interruption. Naomi remembered every second of it. Every movement. Every timestamp. Every glance Mercer exchanged with the unmarked SUV parked half a mile behind the traffic stop. Agent Raymond Ellis slowly turned another page inside the evidence binder. At 9:38 p.m., he said calmly. Officer Mercer manually disabled his body camera while standing beside Agent Brooks's vehicle. Mercer shook his head quickly. "Technical malfunction." Ellis did not even blink. Interesting explanation. Especially because the camera resumed recording 4 minutes later immediately after narcotics appeared inside the vehicle. A low murmur spread again across the courtroom. The prosecutor now looked pale beneath the overhead lights. Papers trembled slightly in his hands as he flipped through files that suddenly meant nothing anymore. Naomi remained standing near the defense table with the silver handcuffs still around her wrists. Judge Hayes noticed them for the first time since the federal agents entered. Her expression tightened slightly. "Remove those restraints immediately," she ordered. One of the deputies stepped forward quickly with a key. The metallic click echoed louder than expected through the room as the cuffs finally fell away from Naomi's wrists. Red pressure marks circled her skin where the steel had rested for nearly 48 hours. Naomi rubbed her hands once, but said nothing. Mercer stared at those marks and looked away almost instantly. Shame was beginning to settle into the room now, thick and uncomfortable, the kind nobody could escape from. Ellis approached the courtroom monitor mounted beside the bench. "There is one more detail this court deserves to see." He pressed a button on a small remote. Grainy nighttime footage filled the screen. Security camera video from a gas station less than 2 miles from the traffic stop. Naomi's black sedan sat beneath bright white canopy lights while she pumped gas alone. Then another vehicle entered the frame. An unmarked dark SUV. Mercer's SUV. The timestamp read 9:26 p.m. Mercer visibly stiffened. Travis turned fully toward the screen. You told me we never saw her before the stop. Mercer snapped back instantly. Be quiet. But Ellis continued calmly. Video enhancement confirms Officer Mercer approached Agent Brooks's vehicle while she was inside paying for fuel. 38 seconds later, he returned to his SUV carrying an unidentified package. Naomi finally spoke again, her voice low and steady. The same package later recovered from my trunk. Silence swallowed the courtroom whole. Even the rain outside seemed quieter now. Mercer loosened his collar slowly as sweat rolled near his temple. For years he had controlled every room he entered through intimidation, reputation, and the assumption that nobody would ever question his word over someone like Naomi Brooks. But now the cameras were still rolling. The jury was still watching. And for the first time in a very long time, Daniel Mercer realized he was no longer the most powerful person in the room. The silence inside courtroom 8B no longer felt uncertain. It felt dangerous. Daniel Mercer sat rigid in the witness chair, staring at the paused gas station footage frozen on the courtroom monitor behind him. His own SUV remained visible beneath the bright canopy lights like evidence carved into stone. Outside, rain clouds darkened the Chicago skyline, while distant sirens drifted faintly through the courthouse windows 30 stories above the street. Nobody in the room looked at Naomi Brooks the same way anymore. Not the jurors, not the reporters, not even the deputies standing beside the walls. The black woman they had watched enter court in handcuffs now stood at the center of a federal corruption case that stretched far beyond a single traffic stop. Travis Cole wiped nervous sweat from his forehead and shifted again in his seat. Every movement he made seemed louder now. Every breath, every glance. Judge Eleanor Hayes folded her hands carefully atop the bench. Officer Mercer, she said evenly, this court is giving you one opportunity to clarify your testimony before federal obstruction charges become part of this proceeding. Mercer finally looked up. For a moment, Naomi almost recognized the man he used to be before greed hollowed him out. Tired eyes, tight jaw, fear sitting behind forced anger. But then his expression hardened again. This is a setup, he snapped. She is trying to protect herself. Naomi did not react to the accusation. Instead, she slowly reached into the evidence folder once more and removed a small silver flash drive. Agent Raymond Ellis accepted it silently before plugging it into the courtroom monitor system. This footage was recovered from a secondary highway traffic camera positioned approximately 800 yards from the stop location, Ellis explained. The monitor flickered. Grainy nighttime video appeared. Interstate 57 stretched dark and wet beneath scattered overhead lights while rain drifted through passing headlights like silver dust. Naomi's sedan sat parked on the shoulder, with Mercer's SUV behind it. The footage had no sound. Only movement. Only truth. The courtroom watched as Mercer approached Naomi's trunk during the body camera interruption. Watched him glance once over his shoulder toward Travis. Then watched him remove something small from inside his own jacket before leaning into Naomi's vehicle. Travis went pale immediately. Oh my God, he whispered. Mercer spun toward him. Do not say another word. But panic had already broken through Travis's face completely. You told me the drugs came from a confidential informant. Mercer slammed his hand against the witness rail hard enough to echo through the room. I said shut up. Deputies instantly moved closer. Judge Hayes struck her gavel sharply. Officer Mercer, control yourself. Naomi stayed motionless beside the defense table while the room unraveled around her. Months earlier, she had memorized this exact possibility during undercover preparation training. The moment corruption stopped pretending to be professional and started collapsing under its own weight. Mercer looked trapped now. Not because of Naomi. Because of evidence. Because lies required silence to survive, and this courtroom had become far too loud. Ellis stepped toward the bench again. Your Honor, the DEA also recovered financial records connected to Officer Mercer over the past 14 months. Another document appeared on the monitor. Bank transfers, cash deposits, offshore account summaries, numbers climbing far beyond a police salary. The jury stared silently. One older juror slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes like he no longer trusted what he was seeing. Naomi finally spoke again, calm as ever. The Narcotics Task Force stopped reporting seized evidence accurately almost a year ago. Her voice carried softly through the courtroom. Drugs disappeared. Cash disappeared. People disappeared into the system because nobody questioned the officers making the arrests. Mercer stared at her with open hatred now, but Naomi saw something else beneath it. Regret. Not regret for what he had done. Regret that he had chosen the wrong woman to frame. Then suddenly the courtroom doors opened once more. A young federal analyst hurried inside, carrying another folder against his chest. He walked directly to Ellis and whispered something into his ear. Ellis's expression changed instantly. Slowly, he turned toward Naomi. "Agent Brooks," he said quietly, "we just received confirmation from Internal Affairs." The room held its breath. There are 17 more names connected to this operation. The number settled over the courtroom heavier than the storm clouds hanging above Chicago. 17 more names. Nobody spoke for several long seconds after Agent Raymond Ellis said it. Even the reporters stopped typing. Judge Eleanor Hayes slowly leaned back in her chair, the wood creaking softly beneath her as though the weight of the entire courtroom had suddenly shifted onto her shoulders. Naomi Brooks lowered her eyes briefly toward the defense table. The silver badge beside her hand reflected pale light from the overhead fixtures, but there was no victory in her expression, only fatigue. 11 months undercover had not ended with applause or celebration. It ended with a room full of people realizing how much damage had been done while nobody was watching. Officer Travis Cole sat frozen beside the witness stand, staring blankly at the floor tiles beneath his polished shoes. 17, he whispered weakly. Ellis nodded once. Officers, supervisors, outside distributors, and 2 evidence clerks. Mercer closed his eyes for a brief moment like he was trying to hold something together inside himself. But when he opened them again, the anger was gone. What remained looked older than anger. Tired. Hollow. Rainwater slid down the courthouse windows in slow streaks, while distant thunder rolled across the city like fading drums. Naomi remembered another night almost 8 months earlier when she first crossed paths with Mercer inside a dim narcotics briefing room downtown. Back then he had seemed controlled, sharp, respected by half the department. Officers laughed at his jokes. Detectives trusted his instincts. Nobody questioned why so many arrests connected to his unit involved missing paperwork or mysteriously unavailable body camera footage. And nobody noticed how often poor black neighborhoods became targets while wealthy districts remained untouched. Naomi had noticed. That was why she volunteered for the operation. Judge Hayes looked toward Mercer again. "Officer Mercer," she said quietly, "if there is anything this court should hear before federal custody begins, now would be the time." Mercer stared silently at the monitor still displaying the grainy interstate footage. The image of himself leaning into Naomi's trunk remained frozen there for everyone to see. A single decision captured forever beneath highway lights and rain. Finally, he spoke. "You know what the funny part is?" His voice sounded distant now. Flat. "I used to believe I was one of the good ones." Travis looked at him in disbelief. "Dan," Mercer ignored him. 20 years on the job. 12 commendations. I worked narcotics before half these reporters even graduated college. He laughed once, though no humor reached his eyes. Then the money started showing up. Naomi listened without interruption. Mercer rubbed both hands slowly across his face. "At first it was easy to justify. We took drugs off the street. Nobody cared where a little extra evidence went. Nobody cared who got blamed." His eyes drifted toward Naomi for the first time in minutes. "Until you." The courtroom stayed perfectly still. Naomi met his gaze calmly. No hatred. No triumph. Only sadness. Mercer swallowed hard. "I pulled your plate before the stop," he admitted quietly. "Saw a black woman driving alone after dark in an old sedan. Thought you would panic like everybody else." Naomi finally answered. "That was the mistake." Mercer gave a slow nod. "Yeah." Somewhere near the back row, one of the reporters quietly lowered her camera. The room no longer felt like a trial. It felt like a confession unfolding beneath fluorescent lights and rain-stained windows. Ellis stepped forward again, holding another sealed folder. "Your Honor, federal warrants are already being executed at 4 additional locations connected to this investigation." Judge Hayes nodded slowly. "Then this court will fully cooperate." Naomi looked toward the courthouse windows as lightning flashed faintly beyond the skyline. For the first time in nearly a year, she felt the operation finally beginning to breathe again. Not because corruption had disappeared, but because silence had. The rain finally began to ease outside the courthouse, but inside courtroom 8B the air still felt heavy enough to stop breathing. Daniel Mercer sat motionless beneath the fluorescent lights while federal agents quietly repositioned themselves near every exit. Nobody needed instructions anymore. The room understood exactly what was happening. One corruption case had just cracked wide open, and the people inside this courtroom were standing directly beneath the collapse. Naomi Brooks remained near the defense table, her hands resting lightly against the polished wood where the silver handcuffs had been only minutes earlier. Red marks still circled her wrists. Judge Eleanor Hayes noticed them again and looked away with visible discomfort. For 2 days, this court had treated Naomi like another criminal dragged through the system. Another black woman whose guilt had seemed easier to accept than her innocence. The realization settled slowly across every face in the room. Agent Raymond Ellis stepped toward the center aisle holding a ringing phone against his ear. He listened for several seconds without speaking, then lowered the device slowly. The search teams just completed the first evidence sweep, he announced. 3 off-site storage units linked to Officer Mercer's task force contained missing narcotics, unreported cash, and falsified arrest records dating back nearly 4 years. A wave of whispers spread instantly through the courtroom gallery. One reporter hurried toward the hallway doors while another dictated frantic notes into a recorder with shaking hands. Travis Cole looked physically sick now. "For years," he muttered. "Dan, you said this started last summer." Mercer did not answer immediately. He stared at the courtroom monitor where the interstate footage still remained frozen beneath grainy highway lights. Naomi could almost see the exact moment his world had ended reflected inside his eyes. Not when the DEA entered. Not when the footage played. It ended the second he realized people were finally paying attention. Mercer leaned back slowly in the witness chair. "You want the truth?" he asked quietly. Nobody interrupted him. "The system was already broken before I touched it." His voice sounded tired now, stripped of arrogance and authority. Nobody cared when evidence disappeared as long as conviction numbers stayed high. Nobody asked questions when neighborhoods flooded with arrests every election year. His eyes drifted toward Naomi again, and nobody ever believed people like her when they tried to fight back. Naomi held his gaze steadily. "That does not excuse what you became." Mercer gave a weak nod. "No, it does not." Silence followed. Not hostile silence. Human silence. The kind that appears when everyone in a room suddenly understands how easily power turns dangerous when nobody challenges it. Judge Hayes folded her hands carefully. "Agent Brooks," she said quietly, "this court owes you an apology." Naomi looked toward the bench. For a moment, the entire courtroom seemed to pause with her. Then she answered softly, "Respectfully, Your Honor, I am not the only person this system owes one to." The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Several jurors lowered their eyes. A deputy near the rear wall shifted uncomfortably. Even the prosecutor looked ashamed now. Naomi continued calmly. "There are people sitting in prison cells because someone decided their voices mattered less than a badge." Rainwater slid slowly down the windows behind her as pale afternoon light finally began breaking through the clouds above the city skyline. Ellis stepped beside Naomi and handed her a small folder stamped confidential. "These are the names of the first 8 wrongful convictions connected to Mercer's unit," he said quietly. Naomi accepted the folder carefully, almost gently. She opened it just enough to see the first photograph clipped inside. A young black teenager staring nervously into a booking camera from 3 years earlier. 17 years old. Possession with intent to distribute. Sentence, 12 years. Naomi closed the folder. Slowly, her jaw tightened for the first time all day. Across the room, Mercer saw the photograph too. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Daniel Mercer looked truly ashamed. The storm outside finally broke apart completely, and pale afternoon sunlight began slipping through the courthouse windows in long golden lines across the marble floor. The change in light transformed courtroom 8B into something quieter now, almost reflective, as if the building itself understood that history had shifted inside these walls. Naomi Brooks stood silently near the defense table holding the confidential folder against her chest while reporters gathered near the exits, speaking in hushed voices instead of shouting questions. Nobody looked eager anymore. The room had lost its appetite for spectacle. Daniel Mercer remained seated beneath the witness stand lights, shoulders lowered, hands clasped tightly together like a man trying to hold on to whatever dignity he still had left. Across from him, Travis Cole looked completely shattered. Young, lost, no longer protected by the uniform he once wore with careless confidence. Judge Eleanor Hayes slowly removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. This court is officially suspending all proceedings connected to Chicago Metro Narcotics Task Force, pending federal review. Her voice sounded heavier than before. Every conviction tied to the unit will be re-examined immediately. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly after hearing those words. Somewhere in the city, people sitting inside prison cells still had no idea that their lives might finally change because one lie had collapsed in public. Agent Raymond Ellis stepped toward Mercer, holding a fresh stack of documents. Federal transportation is waiting downstairs. Mercer nodded faintly without resistance. The fight had left him hours ago, but before the agents could move him, Mercer looked toward Naomi one last time. "Why did you stay undercover this long?" he asked quietly. "You could have exposed me months ago." Naomi studied him for several seconds before answering. "Because corruption survives in layers." Her voice remained calm, steady enough to fill the silent courtroom without force. "If I arrested one officer too early, the rest would disappear before we found them." Mercer looked down at the floor. Naomi continued softly. "I needed the whole system to reveal itself." The words settled heavily across the room. Travis stared at Naomi with disbelief still lingering behind his eyes. "You let us arrest you," he whispered. Naomi finally looked at him directly. "I knew the risk." Travis swallowed hard. "You could have gone to prison. So did the innocent people your unit arrested." Travis lowered his head immediately after that. He had no answer because there was none. Near the jury box, one older juror quietly wiped tears from her face while pretending to organize papers inside her purse. The prosecutor stood motionless beside his table, unable to meet Naomi's eyes anymore. Ellis carefully placed a hand on Mercer's shoulder. "It is time." Mercer stood slowly. The sound of the chair sliding backward echoed through the courtroom with painful clarity. Nobody spoke while federal agents positioned themselves around him. Naomi watched silently as the same man who once smirked beside flashing highway lights now walked toward the courtroom doors surrounded by federal officers. Halfway there, Mercer stopped unexpectedly. He turned back toward Naomi one final time. Sunlight crossed his face through the courthouse windows, softening the hard lines that years of authority had carved into him. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "I never thought someone like you would outlast all of this." Naomi did not smile. "That was your second mistake." Mercer gave the faintest nod before continuing toward the doors. This time, nobody stopped him. The heavy courtroom doors opened slowly, then closed behind him with a deep echo that rolled across the marble walls like the ending of something larger than a trial. Naomi remained standing in silence afterward, the confidential folder still resting against her chest, while sunlight warmed the red marks left behind by the handcuffs. For the first time in 11 months, she no longer looked like someone hiding inside the shadows. She looked exactly like what she had always been, a woman who refused to disappear. By the time Naomi Brooks stepped out of the courthouse, the rain had completely stopped. Chicago glowed beneath fresh evening light, the wet streets reflecting gold from traffic signals and office windows stretching across downtown like rivers of glass. News vans lined the curb outside the courthouse steps, their satellite dishes pointed toward the sky, while reporters crowded behind metal barriers hoping for one final statement. But Naomi did not stop for the cameras. She moved quietly down the courthouse steps with her dark coat folded over one arm and the confidential folder still held close against her side. The city air felt colder now without the storm, crisp against the faint pressure marks still visible around her wrists. Federal agents escorted Daniel Mercer through a separate exit on the opposite side of the building to avoid the growing crowd gathering outside. Naomi never looked back toward him. Some endings did not need witnesses. Agent Raymond Ellis caught up beside her near the bottom of the stairs. "The Attorney General's office already called," he said quietly. "They want a full briefing tonight." Naomi nodded once. "And the wrongful conviction cases?" Ellis exhaled slowly. "The first emergency review hearing starts tomorrow morning." Naomi looked out across the busy Chicago streets where people hurried home beneath glowing storefront signs and steaming subway vents rising through the sidewalks. Most of them had no idea that inside the courthouse behind her, an entire system had just started unraveling. Ellis studied her carefully. "You did good work, Naomi." She stayed silent for a moment before answering. Good work would have stopped it sooner. Ellis shook his head gently. No undercover operation ends clean. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly toward the folder in her hands. Inside rested photographs, case files, names, and years stolen from innocent people who had trusted a system that failed them. She thought about the 17-year-old boy from the photograph. 12 years sentenced because nobody questioned a police report. Because somebody saw his skin before they saw his humanity. Traffic moved slowly through the intersection ahead while evening sunlight reflected across the courthouse windows behind her. For the first time in months, Naomi allowed herself to breathe without calculating risk. No hidden microphones beneath her jacket. No false identity. No pretending to be smaller